Hello, systems students. For those of you who were not in class on day 3 of our conversation on internal controls, and even for those of you who were there but would like to review again what we talked about, this is a summary of what we did and what you need to know and where to go from here. The first thing we did in class is we quizzed ourselves on the framework for internal controls that was developed by the SOSO group, this commission of something. I can't remember what the SOSO abbreviation stands for. But we reviewed this to see how much we can recall. So get out a blank piece of paper and with your notes put away, see how much you can recall without reviewing your notes, and then go grab your notes and fill in the missing blanks. And that will tell you how close you are to identifying the 5 major framework pieces and then being able to say something about each one of those pieces. So here I show you the control environment and some further descriptions of what that entails. Risk assessment, information and communication, monitoring, and control activities. So make sure you can identify each major framework piece and say something about each one. The other thing we had in that quiz, informal quiz that we had out, let me see if I can find it. I didn't think I was going to show it to you, so I didn't already have it open. Was the last page had a flow chart. Here it is. And you were asked to identify which piece of the SOSO framework is being described in the flow chart. Now it's not a super pretty flow chart. I did this in Word, but it's pretty, it gets the job done. So the flow chart starts with identifying an event, a threat, something that confronts the company. Then, next step, estimate the likelihood or probability of the threat actually occurring. In other words, worrywarts in our lives can identify lots of things that might go wrong, but what is the probability of that actually happening? Then we estimate the impact. So if it does happen, how badly would we be hurt? How much money could we lose? That sort of a thing. Maybe it's our reputation that would be lost. But what is the impact? Then identify any controls that could help us prevent this from happening. So we've discovered a risk. We've identified that it could happen, either likely or unlikely or somewhere in between, but how likely is it to happen? We know how much it would cost us, how much money we might lose if it happens. So we need to find a control. What can we do to prevent it from happening? Once you've identified what you could do about it, estimate the cost and the benefit of instituting the control. So if your worst case possible loss up here is a $100,000 loss, yet the control that you need to prevent that loss costs you $500,000 to implement, then you do a little cost-benefit analysis and you realize, it's not worth it. You'll take the risk to lose the 100,000 than to spend the 500,000 to implement the control. So, all right, what do you decide to do? Is the cost beneficial to protect the system from a threat? Well, we can either go down here and this says reduce the risk by implementing the control. So we put the control in place. And then once we do that, we go back up to the top. Or we could instead go this way and not implement the control, just attempt to avoid, share, or accept the risk, and then come back up here, and it implies that we're back at the beginning again. In other words, this is a continuous process. So which piece of the SOSO framework is being described in the flowchart? And the answer is risk assessment. This is a company that is continually assessing its risks for bad things happening. And risk increases when we are in highly competitive markets. We go in a new area that we weren't in before. We get new personnel, something like that. Our risk goes up, and we are continually trying to assess what is the risk, what's the likelihood of it happening, should we put any controls into place, is it worth putting a control into place to try to prevent this risk from happening. Okay, so risk assessment. We also went back and we revisited this article that we talked about earlier, the 8 ways to deter fraud. And we really went back to this Google document that everyone chipped in and contributed to back on the first day, because here people each took one of the 8 and summarized them. So we just took a moment to review what those 8 ways were. We also focused in on this piece right here, becoming aware of the fraud triangle. What's interesting is if you each go and do a Google search for images of fraud triangle and see what comes up. Not much this time. I've gotten much better results before. Images of fraud triangle. Okay, prior screen just wasn't loading very well. Here's a whole bunch of images on the fraud triangle. So I wanted you to realize that the fraud triangle that is mentioned in that article, 8 Ways to Deter Fraud, is actually a thing. So here are a whole bunch of different people putting that image to words here, and you can see that they all are very, very similar. The general idea is that, let me make this one bigger. There is some sort of pressure that a person is under. So probably financial pressure at home is a big one. Okay, broke, gambling debts, that sort of thing. They feel some kind of pressure. They also need to have the opportunity to do it. And then inevitably, as human beings are, we can justify it or rationalize it. All of these fraud triangles are very similar. Pressure, opportunity, rationalize. Sometimes they use slightly different words. Let me look for an example. One of them somewhere in here used motivation, and I can't seem to find that one at the moment. Oh, here we go. Here's one. Opportunity, motivation, rationalization. So don't be alarmed if you see slightly different words used to the fraud triangle, but all of the ideas are trying to get across the same general point. Something else to point to, where did I see it? This is a little picture that was put together by a group, and they got this from, if I zoom in really, really big, you can see that their source was the ACFE. And if you do a little search on that, ACFE, you will see that that is the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners. So if you find this kind of topic interesting, you might find it fun to spend some time on their website. But in the end, here is another pictograph, I guess you could call it, describing the fraud pyramid opportunity, and they give some examples of opportunities, incentives, okay, and what those are, and rationalization. and some examples of ways that people rationalize doing this. So spend a little time on your own kind of contemplating this idea and thinking about this idea. And go back to that Google Doc and reread the summaries of that article as well. Okay, what else did we do that day? I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. Go past my prior summaries of the daily conversations. We talked about your homework, the memo that you submitted where you summarized the password articles and the spreadsheet blunders, including the examples of blunders in that last spreadsheet link. So if you want a refresher on some of those, go back and read those articles again. Then we went and reviewed the check digits that we talked about in class last time. So if you need to catch up on this, go back and re-watch a couple of those things in YouTube. And that led us back to this assignment again. So we'd already focused in a prior class on the check digits, making one and using one. And I did one, this was my examples of making one and using one. And then here's your turn, and you will make one and you will use one. Start with my beginner file here. Okay, so we already talked about those two pieces. There's two more here that I haven't talked about yet. So the first one is ensuring that there's no missing data, or you might call this a completeness check. And then the last one is data validation lists that are relational to each other. So let's talk about each one of those projects. Here's the missing data or the completeness check. And what you're going to do is you're going to learn probably a new function for all of you. Maybe a few of you have heard of the is error before. And you're going to use that to make sure that your users do everything that they are supposed to do. So I made a fake invoice here and I pretended that each one of these lines have to be filled in by your employee before they would actually get a number down here at the bottom that they could send to the client. This way you won't have an employee who fills in maybe 3 of the 4 lines, and because they don't fill in the last line, they have an inaccurate total at the bottom. You're trying to prevent them from providing customers with inaccurate bids or quotes, that kind of a thing. Okay? So how are we going to do that? How are we going to make sure that they don't get a number down here unless every single one of these things are entered? Let me show you an example of mine. And I forgot to open this earlier, so bear with me. This is what you're going to do. This is me having it done. So I don't really care about what's in here. This is kind of like me making up words. My point is, I want each one of these lines, each one of these are a key critical thing in this invoice and must be entered, must be filled out by your user. You can see I already have, let me go back to your copy. Your copy already has drop-down boxes for your user to pick something from. Your file already has a VLOOKUP where based on the product that your user picked, they get a price. That's already done. You don't need to do that. Your file also already has a drop-down box where let's pretend your user has to pick a factor, a 1, a 2, or a 3. So if they pick a 3, now this finishes out at $450 and they get a grand total at the bottom. This is the problem right now. Your user has not filled in any of the remaining key critical pieces of this project. And as long as they have not answered these key critical pieces, we don't want them to get a number down here because we don't want them accidentally just hitting print and giving this to a customer with a bad total down here. So the only thing that you are doing is you are modifying this formula here. So it won't just be a sum up the column. You're going to get a little fancier than that. What's it going to look like? Here's mine. Right now you can see that I don't have a total here or a zero. I have the words missing data, which is telling the user, oh, we're missing something. Now my employee might come in and correctly enter a number here and it finishes filling out the first line, but they still don't have a total down here because they are still missing data. They haven't answered any of the remaining key critical pieces to this fake invoice that I've created here. They answer the next one, great, that line's done, but they're still missing data. And the next one, great, it's getting better, but we're still missing data. We are forcing our user to answer every single one of these key critical lines. Now watch, when I get to the last one, now I finally get a total because my user has answered every single critical line. Okay, so you are only modifying this formula here, and it's a combination of if and is errors that are in there. So I'm going to get out of that cell so you don't stick around in there too long. What I'd like you to do, as I mentioned in E360, is go do some YouTube searches and learn what this is error function is all about. Okay. All right, so that's the completeness project, or the one ensuring that we have no missing data. The last piece there is relational data validation lists. You have done validation lists like this one here. You've created these drop-down boxes, these lists, using data validation. So that is not new. However, what you have not done is something where, maybe I pick a city, Eau Claire, and maybe that was from a drop-down list where I picked the city, and then based on what I picked here, now I have another drop-down box over here that automatically only gives me three choices: 54701, 54702, or 54703. And so that drop-down box had to first look at the city and then give me all the possible zip codes for that city. So it has to look at a different cell before it determines what to give you in the list. These are drop-down boxes that are relational. I give you a file. Notice here I want you to do E, F, and G. Sorry, I had to cough. It was not avoidable. Okay, this is the file that I give you, and here we have an invoice where we do several different things. And here this company does roofing, siding, and windows. And based on the product, so for example, is the person quoting an air conditioner? Well, then we only want codes for different air conditioners, a Lennox air conditioner, a Trane air conditioner, whatever. If instead they picked a roof, Then we want codes that are related to roofs, a steel roof, a vinyl, asphalt, whatever, the different kinds of roofs. So based on what the person enters here, the next drop-down list options will change. I give you all the products over here. This is key. I also give you a hint. Up here is what you're going to use to create your drop-down boxes. This table over here is what you are going to use for your VLOOKUP. All right, so what are we selling? These are the services that we do. We do roofs, we do air conditioners, we do siding, windows, and we do gutters. If it's a roof, these are our 4 roof products. If it is an air conditioner, these are all of our air conditioners that we sell. Siding, windows, gutters. Okay, so these are all of the products that we sell. This table is set up like this, with the services going down here on the vertical line and the detail going across the top. This is set up like this specifically, purposely, because that's the way this indirect function works. Now, I'm not going to give you too much more input with that other than go do some YouTube videos and research this indirect function. And after watching some YouTube videos, what's one other hint that I can give you? Notice that I saved some shortcuts over here. So if I click on services, you can see that I have identified all of these as services. That might help you. Some of you are just going to go ahead and select all of them. One of the reasons this is important is if I do a list, my source, I could either say, hey, my source is these cells right here. And that's great. That's what would be my list. But what if we wanted our customer to be able to add more items down here? They can't. They can't add anything more down here and have it automatically be part of the list. But if instead I identify it as a name, remember I had these cells named the word services. Let's see if I got all that right. Look what happened with my drop-down box. It looked for a set of cells that I had named services, which is all of these. Which cell did I put my data? There it is. I'm going to make that a pretty color so I can find it next time. And so under data and data validation, the second that I said my source equals services, it went and it found whatever cells I had labeled services, and it went ahead and identified all of those. So that can help make some of your equations prettier if you like it. If you don't like doing that, you don't have to do it. You can ignore that little bit. Let's see. So what are we going to do? I'm going to show you my example. Here's mine. This is a completed one. So as I said in E360, I only want you messing with E, F, and G. You don't need to finish out. I just reused a project that I had done earlier, but that's not my focus in this project. So I want you to be able to create a drop-down box where the product pops up, like a roof, gutters, that sort of a thing. Your user should be able to pick a product. And then, based on that product, these codes should change. Our roofs are steel roofs or asphalt roofs, so I'll pick a steel one here. Gutters, you'll see my choices are different. Well, they would have been different if I would have correctly carried down my formula. F4. Oopsie. Carry that down. Okay. Now you can see up here my codes were only roof codes. Down here I have completely different codes because these are gutter codes. Vinyl, aluminum, steel, completely different codes. Siding, different codes again. We've got wood, vinyl, that sort of a thing. So these codes change based on the product here. So go do some YouTube videos and learn all about this indirect function right here. Okay? What else? You can see that my VLOOKUP auto-populated here as well. So based on the code, the price should automatically pop in as well. And had I brought that down, that also should have updated. Shame on me for not finishing my homework, right? Okay. I thought eventually I'd get E360 back up. Too many screens open. Clean it up a little bit. Okay, so back to E360, our relational data validation list. You are only going to work in columns E, F, and G. Don't worry about the rest of the spreadsheet at all. And we have not talked about the flowcharts yet. We are going to talk about those on Thursday in class. So this gives you enough to work on for now. This is the summary. You have one file that you're going to make one and use one. And then you have a different file that you're going to practice this completeness or making sure there's no missing data. And then you have another file where you're going to practice these relational drop-down boxes.